Hi everyone, welcome to today's lesson. We're going to be following on from the last 2 weeks where we were looking at specific features of the face. So you remember last week we were doing the mouth, and the week before that we looked at the nose. So this week we're going to be looking at the eye, which is obviously a really important aspect of portrait drawing, always an important aspect of portrait drawing. Just like the last couple of lessons, we're going to look at the major forms that make up this particular feature, and then I'll just be doing a demonstration working from a reference and show you how you're going to kind of apply the general principles of how the forms work. So if we think about the eye conceptually, we want to remember that it's an eyeball, so it's a ball sitting in a socket in the eye. So if you look at a skull, you can see the socket that the eye actually sits within. And then all of the kind of major forms of the eye that we see visibly beyond the eyeball itself, which you see in the center of the eye, kind of lay over the eye. So you want to make sure when you're drawing it, you're thinking about the fact that you've got these eyelids that are sitting over a sphere. So we'll call this our top eyelid, this is our bottom eyelid. So I've now got two lids that are sitting over a sphere. Now the lids kind of roll back and meet the rest of the face. So at the top they tend to go into kind of a dip that then goes back out towards the brow. So we've got the brow that kind of projects over the eye and protects it, and that in turn connects with the side of the nose. On this side we've got a tear duct, which kind of alters the shape slightly, and it tends to kind of come to more of a point on the side opposite the nose side. So the side of the nose has the tear duct. Then we've got our two lids over the top. Sometimes, so this fold that sits underneath the brow can tuck right up and kind of cover the eyelid entirely. You don't always see the eyelid. It varies from person to person. The eyelids themselves have a thickness, so when we're drawing them we want to bear in mind they aren't kind of flat. They actually have some thickness to them. So you tend to get an evident kind of top of the bottom eyelid that is illuminated when you have light from above, which is typical. So this would be illuminated, and then the eyelid cutting back from that would be darker because it's kind of cutting back in, wrapping around the eye obviously, and that tends to meet the top of the cheek, which again projects back out, so you tend to have a kind of an effect where that eyelid is a bit darker at the bottom, lighter at the top. Then the top eyelid is the opposite, so if it's lit from above, the thickness is evident because the bottom of the top lid is in shadow. And then within that, so we're still thinking about the sphere of the eyeball, and then in the eyeball we always have an iris and a pupil. I'm going to talk a bit more about how we go about drawing those when we do our demo in a moment. But I just wanted to go over these major forms. So things to bear in mind are you've got this little tear duct which alters the shape of the inner eye. You want to think about where this crease falls relative to the eyelid. So sometimes it covers the eyelid entirely, sometimes it goes quite far back and you see a lot of the eyelid. And then you want to make sure that the eyelids have thickness. And the other thing you want to think about is look for the high point and the low point, so the high point of the top lid and the low point of the bottom lid, because they tend not to be symmetrical. So sometimes when people draw eyes, they make them just look like kind of symmetrical diamonds, and that's not realistic. So usually there'll be a kind of a shallower side and then a steep side, and the same goes for the bottom lid. So there'll be a low point that's different from the high point in the top lid, and that varies from person to person. Usually caused by the lens, which kind of bulges out of the eyelid, bulges out of the eyeball, pulls the eyelid around. But that's pretty much it. So you just want to think about those forms, how they relate to the light, and that gives you a pretty good starting point when you're drawing eyes. So let's get started on this demonstration. So I'm going to do it reasonably large. Let's make it kind of, how big do you want this eye to be? So it's very clear. Maybe about kind of that big I'll do it. So got my eye up on screen now. Let's start by placing roughly kind of a little mark for where we want the inner eye. So maybe about there. Then slightly higher than that is the outside point of the eye where those eyelids are sweeping past. I'm going to keep it pretty light as I work this. So from there, we want to think about exactly what shape it takes. Just kind of using straight line construction for this. Keeping it soft, as I say. Then I'm going to look for the shape of the bottom lid as it wraps around the bottom of this eyeball. So it's a little bit steeper. It kind of comes down to about this point is the low point, just here. And from there it kind of angles back up. Then above that, we'll put some marks for this crease at the top of the eyelid and how that thickness changes. Another crease coming in here. Bottom kind of shadow on the eyelid that has some kind of slight wrinkles in it. Then we've got that highlight on the top of the lid. So I'm just going to alter this slightly or raise it back out. Just want to make sure that lid is thick enough. Then I'm going to put the bottom thickness of the top lid in. Ignoring the eyelashes for the time being. Put a bit more of a suggestion in those as we develop this eye. Then I also just want to plot, just going to alter the shape of this bottom lid a bit while I'm at it. just want to place a quick suggestion for the pupil, darkening it, and also the iris around that. So that's pretty much all of the kind of major forms blocked in very lightly. So now I can start adding some value to this. So let's start with the underside of the top lid. That's going to go pretty dark. Look for some variation in that, so a bit of a bedbug line on the edge there, and then it gets gradually lighter. So then we can move down this bottom lid, which is nowhere near as dark as that top lid, but it is still in shadow. You can build those tones. So now we can go in and look for, can I erase actually a little bit of this highlight. So the other thing you want to think about as you're drawing the eyeball, the shinier part of the eye, is where your highlight's going to go. So I'm going to, now that I'm going to draw this pupil in more strongly, I'm going to make sure I don't draw over the highlight that I define. So I'm about to do a few fairly, not exactly complex things, but quite important things for the texture, kind of the appearance of the texture of the eye. So we're gonna, initially we just go pretty dark with our pupil is almost always kind of just a total black, or your darkest value. In your pupil. Just want to make sure the shape's reasonably good. So we can keep darkening it a bit. Get a bit darker like that. Now, there are kind of two tones to the highlight. So one is really bright, the other's a bit softer. And then when we move into the iris, which is the coloured part of the eye, you'll notice there's a bit of a gradient. This often happens with eyes, particularly lighter coloured eyes like this, but even in darker coloured eyes. There'll be a gradient down where it gets gradually lighter as it gets down to the bottom of the iris, closer to the bottom lid. That's just because of light reflecting up into it. There's usually also a texture, like if I was doing it this close up, you probably see a bit of a texture on the iris, but I'm just going to keep it totally smooth for the sake of this demonstration. But you can see that already starts to really kind of cement and improve the texture, I suppose, of the eye. In addition to that, it tends to have a kind of dark, kind of softish edge around it. So I'm just kind of like fuzzily darken the edge of the iris all the way around. A little bit more at the top because that's a bit more in shadow. So that's the iris almost blocked in, looks pretty good. The other thing you want to bear in mind, looking at the picture, you can see that the white of the eye, even though it's white, is very often not the lightest part of the image. So we're going to just darken that slightly to create a bit of a platform for developing some forms. The eyeball itself has form. First of all, it's got a bit of shadow on it from the top lid. So you want to get that in. It also tends to wrap away to the sides, so it means the side of the white of the eyeball will tend to be a bit darker like this as well. So you can see I can add quite a bit of tone to the eyeball. And you usually get a little bit of tone just at the bottom as well, just because the eyeball is starting to turn back under. So having now put that stuff in, it means I kind of see that I need to darken the top lid a little bit more. Otherwise it was a bit too close to the value of the white of the eye, so it's going a bit darker. I'm not entirely happy with this highlight, so what I might do is just simplify it to a point. There's just kind of complex light illuminating her eye, so I'm just going to simplify it back to a kind of a straight point, which always tends to work pretty well. So you can see the forms of the eye starting to work pretty well now. Got our lids drawn in. Got the form of the eyeball working. It's got the bottom lids fairly evident. I can add a little bit of, not going to add specific eyelashes. But I'll just add a little bit of a sense of irregularity around that part of the eye, and a few kind of different length eyelashes going off there. A couple there, it's not too bad. So the final thing I want to do, having kind of sorted all of this out, is just work on these creases that sort of define where the top lid ends. That's probably just about all we need for that. And then I also want to put a little bit of tone just on the outside edges of the top eyelid, because the center of it's catching a little bit more light than the outside. That works pretty well. And finally, I just want to give a bit of form to the top eyelid as well, as it kind of wraps around. So it's mostly in light, so it's not going to go super dark, but the outside edges of it can be a bit dimmer. And then a little bit of a shadow cast by those lashes. And there's actually kind of like a double fold in this eye, so let's get a sense of that in as well, because I want to kind of work up towards the top of the brow, and to do that we kind of need to get this to work. I'm not going to go all the way up to the brow. Just wanted to kind of develop a bit of a sense of what the brow would be doing above this eye, to kind of contextualize it. Yeah, so something like that's not too bad for that eye. Some of the forms are probably like a little bit off. Obviously, if you're working on a portrait yourself, you want to go for a likeness, so that's the kind of thing you'd scrutinize, but hopefully that gives you the idea and gives you a bit of an approach when you're working with eyes. But yeah, that's it for today. As always, follow our channel for more videos, and if you want personalised tuition for myself and a bunch of other tutors, you can follow the link through to our webpage and sign up. But yeah, that's it for this week, and I think next week will be the last lesson of this academic year, which will probably be on ears of all subjects. But yeah, that's it for today. Hopefully it was good, and I'll see you guys next week.